Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 463. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
Doing well, Kyle. How are you?
Doing very well. Connor is one of the assistant editors that we have at the Institute. And right now at the Institute, we are holding a fundraiser. So please head on over to the Institute and make a donation if you haven't already. We don't do fundraisers very often. We just need to hit our goal. We're a few $1,000s away. We got matching funds. So if you can, head on over, make a donation. It'll be doubled. And we got some great kit bats, butts, and other Libertarian Institute swag. And with that, Connor, let's get into the show today. I have just a few articles before I hand it over to Connor here. All right, Connor, let's get into the news today. First article up here. BRICS set to open doors to new members and eyes de-dollarization. And I wrote this article for the Libertarian Institute on August 23rd. BRICS nations announced their intention to expand their group during a summit in South Africa. China seeks to grow BRICS to be a peer with the group of seven. And Connor, there's already a major update to this article, and that is that BRICS announced they would admit 6 new members: Egypt, Ethiopia, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and oh man, I'm blanking on the last one here. But those are 5 of the 6 new members. And so I will probably have an update on that on the next show. This is really fresh news as I'm recording here. I just figured it would be better to have the updated news in there. But I think all of these comments and the rest of the article still kind of reflects the reasons why BRICS is looking to expand. So on Wednesday in Johannesburg, which is where this BRICS summit is being held, the Indian Prime Minister Modi said that his country welcomed moving forward with consensus on expansion. And then we have President Lula da Silva, and that is the leader of Brazil, and he voiced his support for expansion, including to Argentina. And he said, "We want BRICS to be a multilateral institution, not an exclusive club. It's very important for Argentina to be in BRICS." And the reason these particular statements are so important, Connor, is prior to the summit, there was a discussion that in the West that some of the countries would put up a block to expanding BRICS, and these would be, in particular, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and that is because they saw these countries with having something to lose to adding new members. If more African nations join, if more South American nations join, if more Asian nations join, then this would diminish the roles of these countries. And it doesn't seem that that's really happening. They're changing the name to BRICS Plus, and so it's not like they're losing that status. But here we have Lula just, saying that we want Argentina, and, he's saying we don't want to make this an exclusive club. And so I think in part this, really reflects that the Western consensus, the foreign policy establishment, still really does not understand how much the globe has changed and how the Washington-based effort to isolate Russia and China, how much that has shifted the global desire to have a situation arise where countries could do business outside of the dollar. So the South African foreign minister also voiced support. He said, "We have agreed on the matter of its," or she said, "We have agreed on the matter of expansion. We have a document that we've adopted which sets out the guidelines and procedures for considering countries that wish to become a member of BRICS." And Connor, it looks like there are a potential of 23 countries seeking formal membership right away, and then for that number to expand to 40 countries down the line. The agreement to expand BRICS is an accomplishment for the bloc, as Western media reported that India and Brazil were hesitant to agree to open the group's doors to new members before the South African summit. BRICS is named for 5 members: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Initially, during its founding, it was just BRIC, and then expanded to South Africa, I believe, in 2009. And it is meant to be an economic forum. It is not a military alliance. Members New Delhi and Beijing share a disputed border and have fought violent battles over the line of control in recent years. And so There is, I think, sometimes, particularly in Republican circles, a presentation of Brits as this looming military threat that Russia, China, India, South Africa, Brazil are all going to get together and militarily confront the U.S. And that's really not what we're talking about here, Connor. We're talking about these countries moving to set up different economic systems, but certainly not a military one. So, as Washington has increased its influence over the world economy to exclude countries that disobey the White House's demands, BRICS has emerged as a potential alternative to global economic system based on the dollar. And this is a statement from a Chinese official to the Financial Times in the run-up to this summit. If we expand BRICS to account for a similar portion of the world's GDP as our G7, then our collective voice in the world will grow stronger. One method of moving away from the Washington-led world economy is using an alternative currency to the dollar. And this is from Lula, the Brazilian leader. The creation of a currency for transactions between BRICS countries reduces our vulnerabilities. However, the bloc did not have plans to take that step during this week's gathering. So it seems like it was something that was discussed, Connor, and is increasingly being discussed, but it is not something that is going to be expected to hear any major announcements on that this week. The South African president remarked that an alternative economic system will provide stability. He said, "We are concerned that global financial and payment systems are increasingly being used as instruments of geopolitical consternation. Global economic recovery lies on predictable global payment systems and smooth operating of banking, supply chains, trade, tourism, as well as financial flows." Without naming Washington, the Chinese president took aim at the White House for attempting to use the dollar system to crush developing nations. He said, "Some countries, obsessed with maintaining its hegemony, have gone out of its way to cripple emerging markets and developing countries. Whoever is developing fast becomes a target of containment. Whoever is catching up becomes a target of obstructions." All right. And so, Connor, I just noted here at the end, while growing interest in BRICS is a sign of Washington's waning influence, it is notable that Russian President Vladimir Putin did not join his fellow heads of state in South Africa due to the Washington-backed effort to have him arrested as a war criminal, but Putin did deliver a virtual address. All right, Connor, it appears that the Wagner chief Prigozhin is dead. A plane fell out of the sky yesterday in Russia, and it was one of Prigozhin's planes. It's from my understanding, there were 10 people on the plane, 3 crew, and at least 2 other passengers on the plane were higher-ranking members of the Wagner group and potentially a co-founder of the group. I guess we will wait to see how things unfold here, Connor. I don't want to just go out and say that this is for sure something that has happened. Prigozhin may be doing something a little bit shady here to get off the radar. That's not impossible. At the same time, the man does have a second plane, and so people point out, and somebody else actually. There was an article about Prigozhin using a stunt like this in the past to fake his death. Don't know if that's true, but again, these rumors are out there, so don't want to just say that it's true because from what I've been able to see, there's no proof at the crash site that's yet been produced of like Prigozhin's body. Possible that he's dead. Probable that he's dead. Now, also blame on this. Most people are saying that this was Vladimir Putin. And Connor, it would make sense to me if this was either Putin or somebody within the Russian government. It appears that Prigozhin definitely stepped out of line, waged a rebellion at least against the Russian military, if not outright against the Kremlin, failed in that objective, was exiled to Belarus, spent a little bit of time in Africa before he was supposedly on this plane that fell out of the sky. So it would definitely make sense, especially in that time that Prigozhin was in exile and was in Africa. It looked like Putin was able to basically gain control over the Wagner group. And so it's not like Russia is going to lose, at least in the short term, any military capabilities from Prigozhin's death. So A lot could be going on here. Of course, there's talk that the CIA or the Ukrainians were behind this. Certainly possible too. Up until a couple months ago, this man was one of the key villains of the war in Ukraine before his short-lived rebellion, made him, I guess, endearing to some members of the West. All right, Connor, next up here, Ukraine consistently attacks Moscow amid stalled counteroffensive. And so I just wrote this up. It appears that Ukraine is now launching daily drone strikes against the Russian capital city. Russian air defenses seem to be able to disable most of these drones, Connor. However, that doesn't mean they don't cause damage. On Wednesday, the Neva Tower in Moscow cities, I believe the financial district was damaged on 3 floors because of one of these drones. And then 3 people were also killed in the border region with Ukraine. And we've been talking about this on the show. I think this reflects Ukraine's desperation. They can't gain any ground in their counteroffensive, and so now they're flinging drones at Moscow. It's yet to be seen what the Russian response is. Russia does say that this wouldn't be possible without the West, and so at some point I wouldn't be surprised if Moscow issues some kind of retaliation against Western interests. I'm not sure what that looks like, if it's financial sanctions based or something like that. But my guess is they're very unhappy and looking for a way to respond to these daily drone strikes that are disrupting air traffic in Moscow, and also making sure that it's not like showing vulnerabilities that their capital city is constantly under attack. And Russia is probably right that those attacks would not be able to happen without the Western support and training given to the Ukrainian forces. All right, here. Next up, White House tells Ukraine that Congress will back more war spending. Not surprised. This has been my analysis, Connor, that there is quite an overwhelming number of votes in Congress, no matter what the American people think. 55% of the American people are against giving more aid to Ukraine. That probably means that 5.5% of Congress is. And that might actually be a really accurate number. So very disappointing that this is the case, but I do expect it to go through. I think the best that we could probably hope for, and I'm really not trying to be like a big downer here or anything like that, but I kind of feel like the best that we could hope for, Connor, is for Congress to appoint a special inspector general to oversee this aid. All right, Connor, I'm going to hand it over to you. I think we have quite a few stories for you to talk about here today, a few that you've written for the Libertarian Institute. So what's on the agenda here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to catch up on some of the Iran news to start. So this is from August 10th by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. There was a report in the New York Times about a deal that's been reached between the U.S. and Iran, actually, on a prisoner release and also the unfreezing of a few $billions in frozen funds. So the U.S. and Iran have reached a deal that will free 5 Americans in exchange for the U.S. releasing some Iranians and granting Tehran limited access to $6 billion in frozen Iranian funds. Now, sources told the Times that the negotiations have been going on quietly for 2 years. Prisoner exchanges have typically been kept separate from other issues between the U.S. and Iran, and as part of the first step in the agreement, Iran has released 5 American dual citizens from prison and put them on house arrest at a hotel where they will spend a few weeks before flying to the U.S. Most of them were jailed over spying allegations. And the White House confirmed in a statement that the 5 Americans were released on house arrest, but the Times said that the Biden administration has declined to confirm what Iran will get in return, although sources told the paper that the U.S. has agreed to release several Iranians who were arrested for alleged sanctions violations. And so the U.S. will place $6 billion in frozen Iranian oil profits in an account that will be controlled by Qatar, and Iran will be only able to access these funds to pay for humanitarian goods such as medicine and food. Tensions have been soaring between the U.S. and Iran in the Persian Gulf, but the news is a sign that there is still room for diplomacy between the two countries. A series of media reports early this year said that the U.S. and Iran were close to some sort of interim nuclear deal, but such an agreement never materialized. And now we're going to find out why. So that's a good sign. Of course, this isn't quite the interim deal that we had hoped for. I mean, originally the what had been reported a couple months ago in Middle East Eye was that there was a plan where Iran would see $20 billion unfrozen that is held currently in the IMF and in Iraq and South Korea in exchange really for just simply not exceeding uranium enrichment beyond 60% purity, which Iran has already pledged that they 2 years ago they pledged that they wouldn't do that under any circumstances, and they've kept to their word. Um, so it would have been a simple deal to make. And of course, because it's politically impossible to rejoin the JCPOA. And it did seem like it was possible that that interim deal would actually work. However, we know that a couple of months ago, Robert Malley, maybe a month ago actually, was relieved of his position as the special envoy for Iran. And he only really started doing a good job once these direct negotiations on U.S. soil were taking place with the Iranian UN ambassador, where they were discussing this deal. I mean, it's separate from the indirect talks that were going on that were being brokered by Oman. Which has more to do with prisoner releases as opposed to this nuclear aspect and unfreezing significantly more money than we've seen in this deal that did just happen and that the Times report covers. So there's a very important story in Middle East Eye from August 11th about what happened to Robert Malley, because he was accused of mishandling classified information. And just as they were getting close to inking this kind of a deal, it seemed like it was a likely possibility. And then all of a sudden he's removed from his post. So this article at Middle East Eye is called "Iran Nuclear Deal Opponents Conspired to Oust U.S. Special Envoy Robert Malley." And this is interesting because it sounds like the hawks in both countries work together to sabotage the potential here. So hardliners in Iran opposed to a return of the 2015 nuclear deal cooperated with individuals in the U.S. to oust Robert Malley, the U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, according to sources with direct knowledge of the matter. So Malley was leading the Biden administration's effort to revive the faltering deal before he was put on on administrative leave in late June. The former Obama-era official had helped craft the 2015 nuclear deal. However, on June 29th, after being inactive in his role for weeks, Malley was placed on unpaid leave. He had told colleagues he was taking an extended personal leave for unspecified family reasons, but his security clearance was suspended at some point earlier this year. So efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal, which has been moribund since Washington withdrew under President Trump in 2018, began showing promise in September when the U.S. engaged with Iran in an attempt to ease tensions. Those discussions were aimed at outlining steps to limit Iran's nuclear program and secure the release of detained U.S. citizens in the Islamic Republic and unfreeze some Iranian assets abroad. However, just when it was reported that Iran and the U.S. were nearing a temporary deal that would swap some sanctions relief for Iran, reducing its uranium enrichment activities, Malley disappeared. Sources in Tehran told Middle East Eye that Malley's dismissal had pleased both hardliners in Tehran and individuals in the United States opposed to a return to the accord. A source in Tehran told Middle East Eye that certain hardline and influential elements within Tehran and out of the government, without President Ibrahim Raisi's consent and awareness, had cooperated with anti-deal circles in Washington, D.C. to fabricate information about Malley. The source did not elaborate on the fabricated information, but referenced a report in the pro-government Tehran Times newspaper, which claimed that Malley had mishandled classified documents, saying it was part of a larger plan or puzzle. So the source says the situation surrounding Malley is unprecedented, with influential anti-deal hardliners in Tehran collaborating with anti-deal circles in the U.S. Their attention appears to be preventing any potential deal between Tehran and Washington from materializing. This is not the first time that during Raisi's tenure, hardliners in Iran have sought to sabotage the deal. And the source continues, there have been previous instances where the anti-deal hardliners in Tehran have hampered progress in a deal. So he adds that the Iranian government is now aware of the elements in Tehran seeking to obstruct the deal. And another senior Iranian source said Iranian hardliners initiated the contact with the anti-deal Americans. So there's a July 10th report by the Tehran Times that claimed Malley had, quote, improper contact with various circles and individuals, including Iranians involved in Washington's diplomacy with the Islamic Republic. Now, according to the newspapers, part of his mission, Malley was in regular contact with Iranian diplomatic brokers and pundits who often appeared in Iran's media. And while Malley sought to advance his policies in Iran, these individuals had their own agenda, the newspaper alleged. So reportedly, their, quote, footprint in recent years can be clearly seen in Washington's diplomacy towards Tehran. The newspaper also suggested that Malley did not adhere to protective principles in his dealings with these individuals and raised some points that he was not authorized to discuss. So in another report on the 16th last month, the Tehran Times claimed again that the main problem of Malley stems from his secret talks with Iranian ambassador to the UN, Saeed Iravani, and his meetings with some of the Iranian American figures in the U.S. So these claims were later echoed by the Washington Free Beacon on July 26th, a right-wing American outlet deeply opposed to the nuclear deal, which also suggested that Malley had in fact mishandled classified information. So the Beacon writes, if Malley misplaced a document or failed to secure a piece of information, the State Department's diplomatic security section could revoke his clearance pending an investigation, according to current and former government officials. So the Beacon cited sources claiming that Malley might have leaked classified information to a network of supposedly pro-Tehran advocates who supported the Obama administration's JCPOA, or the Iran deal negotiated during the Obama years. Now, according to the outlet, these advocates were briefed regularly by Malley and other stakeholders involved in the original Iran deal to reinforce the administration's talking points. Reports in the U.S. media have since claimed that the FBI is investigating the Biden administration's Iran point man when the State Department had scrubbed Malley's picture and biography from its website. Middle East Eye contacted the State Department for comment, but did not receive a response by the time of when this article was published. An informed senior source in Tehran, one familiar with the talks between Iran and the U.S., said Malley had stated that his suspension is a result of efforts by certain Republicans. And of course, Michael McCaul, the hawkish chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee, was making a lot of noise about this and demanding investigations into Malley. And he's always been a huge Iran hawk and opposed to these negotiations and efforts to revive the deal. So that would not be surprising. And we're going to get to him more in just a moment. So Malley had told Iranian ambassador Saeed Iravani that his suspension was not a serious matter and that he would return soon. The new allegation that Malley had no authorization to talk to Iravani is absurd, as both the top officials in Iran and the U.S. were fully aware of the talks and had given authorization to their representatives to sit and talk with each other. But Republican members of Congress have repeatedly taken aim at Malley's efforts to revive the deal, even some accusing the 59-year-old of holding, quote, radical sympathies with the Iranian government and enmity toward Israel. Last month, U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair and vocal Republican Michael McCaul alluded to the possibility that Malley may have committed treason if he provided state secrets to a U.S. adversary. He goes, there's no proof of that, but if he did, that would be treason in my view, McCaul said. And regardless of the causes of Malley's sidelining, opponents of the nuclear deal in Iran have welcomed the decision. And they just talk about some, Iran's official news agency, IRNA, run by people close to the influential anti-deal hardliner Saeed Jalil, said Malley's dismissal was, quote, meaningful and coincided with the resolution of certain issues between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. The IRNA added that Malley's removal could be indicative of the U.S. government taking measures to limit the activities of certain figures to reach deals with Tehran. So what's interesting about that is I think it was worth noting that when the IAEA resolved a couple of those outstanding inquiries with Iran, where essentially they just accepted the explanations that Iran had previously provided. And so it appeared that the administration was willing to at least not let the IAEA know that it's okay, you can resolve these issues and we won't put up a fight. We won't oppose you when you do that, because one of the things that was resolved was one of the locations where these small particles of unprocessed uranium had previously been discovered, and there was also the issue of certain particles of uranium that had been enriched to slightly over 84% purity, and all of this was explained that it's just a byproduct of current enrichment processes, and they explained that some of those particles that have been discovered were related to mines that were being operated under when the Shah still controlled Iran. And so they just basically said, okay, well, this matter is put to bed. And so it's likely the case that that sent a message to hardliners in both countries that they're, because I'm sure they already knew about these talks, of course, with the UN, with Iran's UN ambassador, that they were getting closer to a some sort of a deal, because it appeared, the United States did not have to do that. The Biden administration had the IAEA had become heavily politicized ever since these indirect talks in Vienna had restarted, and Rafael Grossi was always playing his role in condemning Iran and never accepting their explanations and saying that they're being uncooperative when, at least on the face of the situation, Iran was in fact being cooperative, and we had covered that extensively, and so. This must have been when, as they're saying here, when this plan was put into motion. But regardless, it's just a shame. Hopefully, this deal that was inked in the last couple of weeks shows that there's still a possibility for some more sanctions relief for the Iranian people, because as we know from Alina Duhan, the special rapporteur for unilateral coercive measures for the UN, the sanctions are, there's food insecurity reaching levels of 60% in many areas in Iran. And so it's just been absolutely devastating to the civilian population. The most important thing is lifting those sanctions. And of course, this whole phony Iran nuclear threat is being used to try and, instead of helping these people get back on their feet, it's being used as an excuse to make this fanciful normalization deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Israel and Saudi Arabia. And of course, in order to do that, Iran has to stay in its place as the ultimate boogeyman in the region. And so, anyway, we'll keep an eye on that and see if there's any further developments between talks between the U.S. and Iran. So this next story is very interesting. It's speaking of sanctions, China's imports of sanctioned Iranian oil have surged to a 10-year high. This one's from the Cradle on August 16th. So Iranian oil exports to China are set to reach a 10-year high this month, as the Asian giant will take about 1.5 million barrels per day, according to data and analytics from the firm Kepler. And Beijing has been importing an average of about 917,000 barrels per day of Iranian oil since the start of the year, often classifying it as coming from Malaysia. According to Bloomberg, deliveries to China have sped up recently after authorities eased a probe into imports of bitumen mixture, which Iranian oil is often disguised as, after being mixed with Venezuelan crude to bypass unilateral U.S. sanctions. So furthermore, traders say Iran's two main grades of crude oil currently have a discount of over $10 per barrel, making it an attractive proposition at a time of surging fuel prices. So one of the senior oil analysts at Kepler told Bloomberg, the higher flat prices go, the better risk-reward ratio for Shandong refiners to look for Iranian crude. And earlier this month, Kepler revealed that Iranian oil exports to China tripled over the past 3 years. The rise comes despite an ever-tightening sanctions regime imposed by the U.S. since their unilateral exit from the JCPOA in 2018 and the rampant smuggling of Iranian oil in the Persian Gulf. So the U.S. withdrew from the Obama-era deal and reimposed a series of economic sanctions attempting to squeeze Iran's oil exports and curtail the country's access to the international financial system. Non-oil exports from Iran to China have also surged in recent months, as the Iran Customs Administration revealed on August 15th that during the first 4 months of this current Iranian calendar year, over $4.5 billion worth of goods were delivered to Chinese ports. Iran and China officially signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement in March of 2021, which I believe was worth $400 billion. And the two nations are also working to deepen defense cooperation. Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu said Tuesday that his country is, quote, committed to improving defense ties with the Islamic Republic. He made the comments during the Moscow Conference on International Security. Okay, so now let's see. Oh, no, this is a piece I wrote for the Institute. Now, this is more about, as we're seeing further diplomacy and Iran's becoming more and more ingratiated with this emerging multipolar world. And so this is a story, speaking of this, Biden's efforts to make this normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia for Israel's benefit. This is, the real breakthrough diplomatically this year was China brokering a real peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is going to continue to have I think, some very positive reverberations throughout the region. And so this is about the Iranian foreign minister visiting Riyadh for the first time since the rapprochement. So this is from August 17th. Iran's top diplomat Hossein Amir Abdollahian held a meeting with his Saudi counterpart in Riyadh last Thursday, where both sides preached unity and dialogue in a one-day visit focused on bilateral ties, regional and international issues. And this comes 5 months after China brokered a peace deal between the two longtime arch rivals. So Amir Abdollahian declared during the press conference with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud that relations between Tehran and Saudi are on the right track and we are witnessing progress. 2 months ago, Prince Faisal became the first Saudi foreign minister to visit Iran since 2006. Now, earlier this month, Tehran announced that the Saudi embassy in Iran had begun its operations. Confirming this, Prince Faisal described it as another step in the development of relations between the two countries. Amir Abdollahian continued, saying these talks in the Saudi Foreign Ministry's Islamic Solidarity Hall, quote, will be a prelude to the meeting of the heads of the two countries. He also touted future trade and security cooperation, although without announcing any new deals. Since the two sides restored full diplomatic relations, there has been talk of creating a naval alliance together, as well as significantly boosting bilateral trade and investment. On Wednesday, or last Wednesday, Iranian state media reported that military officials from both countries met in Moscow on the sidelines of this previously mentioned security conference. In June, Tehran reopened its embassy in the Gulf Kingdom with a flag-raising ceremony. Alireza Enayati, Iran's new ambassador, accompanied Amir Abdollahian for the visit last week to, quote, officially start his mission, according to the Iranian state media broadcaster IRIB. Prince Faisal said, we look forward to the new phase in our relationship based on our Islamic Brotherhood and work towards common interests. The meeting between the top diplomats comes amid U.S. attempts to foster a normalization agreement between Tel Aviv and Riyadh. Amir Abdollahian took aim at Israel in his remarks at the press conference. He proclaimed, we continue to support Palestine, highlighting the nearly 60-year military occupation as the most important issue in the Islamic world. Now, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told the Arab League in May that, quote, the Palestinian issue was and remains the central issue for Arab countries, and it is at the top of the kingdom's priorities. Middle East Eye reported last week that at least 213 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire this year, including 37 children, a rate of nearly one fatality per day. A total of 177 people have died in the West Bank and East Jerusalem this year, making 2023 one of the bloodiest years in the occupied Palestinian territories. Another 36 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip. So both Israel and the U.S. seek to exploit the Abraham Accords, phony, really, normalization agreements as a way of selling weapons to the Arab states while covering up the plight of the Palestinian people suffering under the Israeli apartheid regime. Now, the agreements are also being used as a fig leaf in the region for an anti-Iran NATO-style coalition led by Washington. And the Abraham Accords are becoming increasingly unpopular in the region, however, as a result of rampant Israeli war crimes against Palestinians. So Amir Abdollahian insists that there is no doubt the Zionist regime will continue its efforts to create division in the Muslim world and the region. We follow the movements of the Zionist regime with insight and vigilance, he said. Officially, Riyadh has ruled out any deal recognizing Tel Aviv until the millions of Palestinian Christians and Muslims have their own state. However, media reports suggest the Saudis are holding out for major concessions from the White House, including a NATO-level security guarantee, access to increasingly advanced weapon systems, and assistance in constructing a civilian nuclear energy program. All right, now back to the sanctions enforcement here with Iran. The tanker, the Suez Rajan, which was seized, has now been unloaded off the coast of Texas. So this is from Dave DeCamp on August 20th. Tanker carrying stolen Iranian oil unloads near Texas. So a tanker carrying 800,000 barrels of stolen Iranian oil began unloading its cargo off the coast of Texas on Sunday, despite Iranian warnings of retaliation, the Associated Press reported. So the Marshall Islands flag tanker Suez Rajan was seized by the U.S. under the pretext of sanctions relief back in April and forced to sail to Texas instead of China. American companies were hesitant to unload the Iranian oil over fears of Iranian reprisals in the Persian Gulf. But according to the AP, ship tracking data showed the Suez Rajan starting a ship-to-ship transfer of its cargo to another tanker, the MR Euphrates. The cargo transfer came after a bipartisan group of U.S. senators and House members urged the Biden administration to facilitate the unloading of the oil. Now, the AP report said that the Suez Rajan was owned by Oak Tree Capital Management, an American company based in Los Angeles, but previous reports and ship tracking websites say the tanker is owned and managed by a Greek company. So the U.S. seizure of the Suez Rajan provoked the Iranian seizure of 2 oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, and in response to these Iranian actions, the U.S. has been bolstering its military presence in waters near Iran and considering placing armed troops on commercial vessels. The U.S. has a history of stealing or attempting to steal Iranian energy shipments under the pretext of sanctions enforcement. And last year, the U.S. seized a tanker carrying Iranian oil in Greece and attempted to take the cargo, but a Greek court ruled against the confiscation. Tehran had seized 2 Greek tankers in response to the U.S. move and released them following the court's ruling. In 2021, the U.S. government sold 2 million barrels of Iranian oil for $110 million from a tanker seized near the United Arab Emirates. And during the Trump administration, the U.S. sold off Iranian gas that was bound for Venezuela. Okay, so now I'm just surprised that they found an oil company that was willing to do that, was willing to go through with that. Unfortunately, they may have been convinced, we may find out later, because they were told that U.S. troops will be stationed on their vessels, so on their tankers. So this next story is about Israel bombing Syria again. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on August 21st. 1 Syrian soldier wounded in Israeli airstrikes near Damascus. So Israeli airstrikes, again, near the capital of Damascus late Monday wounded at least 1 Syrian soldier, according to Syria Sana news agency. And they said at around 11:55 this evening, the Israeli enemy carried out a guided missile attack from the direction of the occupied Golan Heights, targeting some points in the vicinity of the city of Damascus, a military source said. And the aggression resulted in the injury of a soldier and some material losses. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights claimed the strikes targeted arms depots belonging to Hezbollah and pro-Iran militias and killed 2 pro-regime fighters. But the account is not confirmed, and the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights often changes its estimates. The attack marks at least the 22nd Israeli bombing of Syria this year. In May, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu doubled airstrikes in Syria since it took power in December of 2022. And Israel frequently targets Syria's international airports, especially this year, and including in the wake of a devastating earthquake that killed thousands of Syrians. They bombed the Aleppo airport, rendering it inoperable 3 times. And Israeli attacks since the earthquake Dave is just reiterating that. And then the Israeli government rarely acknowledges these strikes in Syria, of course, and has not commented on Monday night's attack. Okay, so now this next story is about North Korea and some major war games that have been launched by the U.S. and South Korea, and how Kim is responding, again, with another missile test. So this is from August 21st. I wrote this for the Libertarian Institute. Kim Jong-un oversees cruise missile test as Washington and Seoul launch joint war games. So North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw a cruise missile test while aboard a naval ship on Monday. Concurrently, the U.S. and South Korea began yet another series of military exercises which Pyongyang views as rehearsals for war and regime change. According to the Korean Central News Agency, a state-run media outlet, Kim visited a Navy flotilla on the East Coast to observe the missile launch and watched as sailors on a patrol ship staged the strategic test. Kim was pictured flanked by officers standing on the deck of a vessel and watching the missile as it was fired. And this test was intended to confirm the combat function of the ship and the feature of its missile system, as well as enhance the ability of the seamen to successfully launch an attack mission in an actual war, KCNA reported just hours before Washington and Seoul commenced their war game. The annual Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises eyeing Pyongyang involves tens of thousands of troops from both countries and will run until August 31st. United States Forces Korea issued a statement which says several other countries are, quote, scheduled to participate in different capacities, including Australia, the UK, France, Canada, and the Philippines. And the South Korean military boasted that this year's iteration will be held on, quote, the largest scale ever. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said the drills would simulate various contingency scenarios, such as cyber, terror, and drone attacks. Yoon warned during a meeting of the National Security Council, true peace is preserved only by overwhelming force. Now, on Friday, the North Korean military stated that it scrambled warplanes in response to a dangerous military provocation by a U.S. spy plane in Pyongyang's exclusive economic zone. This includes the area within 200 nautical miles of its territory. The statement reads, the military promptly gave an order to make an emergency sortie toward the airspace intruded by the U.S. strategic reconnaissance plane and carry on alert guard duty. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea recently admonished Washington that if such provocations persist, U.S. spy planes may be shot down. And of course, this is a huge problem because, especially under Biden, the deployment of these spy planes, especially near the Chinese coast, has just gone up dramatically. In 2021, they had flown more than 2,000 by the end of November. In the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the Yellow Sea. And it's one of these things where we freak out and have the whole country has a national panic attack over a weather balloon floating above the continental U.S., and we have to shoot it down with an F-18 and all these, and just you have people calling for scrambling jets and going to war over this. And meanwhile, we're constantly flying military spy planes up along China's coast, and now doing the same thing to the North Koreans, of course. And there's no voice in Congress or in anywhere in the government calling for an end to these kinds of needless provocations. Because, of course, all of these images can be collected with our satellites. And so the only reason to do this is to just be provocative and to poke both Pyongyang and Beijing. And so, but of course, it's going to continue because this is what the Biden administration does. So under the Joe Biden administration, massive U.S.-South Korean joint live-fire war games resumed after a multi-year pause. And so since 2022, in response, the DPRK has launched more than 100 missiles. So in March, Washington and Seoul held their largest live-fire field exercises in 5 years. The drills were dubbed Faux Eagle. And as a part of the giant joint military exercises this year, Washington and Seoul carried out their largest war drills in the history of their 7-decade alliance, including some of which that took place near the border with the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. And tensions have been soaring on the Korean Peninsula largely as a result of these war games, which has seen the White House deploy nuclear-capable bombers, aircraft carriers, and armed Reaper drones. Last month, a U.S. nuclear-armed submarine docked in South Korea for the first time since 1981. And last week, Biden, Yoon, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met at Camp David. The White House declared that the three sides agreed to a multi-year trilateral exercise plan entailing a multi-year trilateral framework that includes annual name multi-domain trilateral exercises, which will constitute an unprecedented level of trilateral defense cooperation. The burgeoning alliance is ancillary to Washington's buildup in the Asia-Pacific for a coming war with China, although the U.S. intelligence community assesses Kim will only use his nation's nuclear-armed status as a means for political and diplomatic ends and not for offensive military purposes. The increased war drills will surely inflame tensions with Pyongyang that much more. And it sounds like they're already running these exercises, it feels like, all year. And it's the largest ever we've done up to this point. And we see this with so many different partners, whether it's Israel earlier this year in these major war games eyeing Iran, or the major drills that were carried out recently with the Philippines and the Australians. It's always and the South Koreans virtually this entire year. We're always trying to break records for how big these war games are right on some other country's doorstep, just practicing destroying them. And so sooner or later, North Korea is going to react. And this is, of course, all about China. So it's just a massive powder keg waiting to go off. So this last story I wrote last night. This is about a Washington Post piece, which has sources that are saying that there was a plan that Donald Trump held with his top economic advisors, and that if reelected, they're planning some massive tariff increases. So former President Donald Trump privately met with his top economic advisors last week and discussed plans for major tariff increases. Three people familiar with the meeting told the Washington Post. One of the ideas which was floated involves a universal baseline tariff on nearly all imports to the U.S., which may be as high as 10%. Now, in attendance were former senior White House officials Larry Kudlow, who has a show on Fox Business, and Brooke Rollins, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, as well as conservative commentator Stephen Moore. According to the report, Trump's advisors have been debating for months what the tariff rate should be without reaching a consensus. However, recently on Kudlow's Fox Business show, Trump called for setting the universal tariff at 10% automatically. He said, I think we should have a ring around the collar of the U.S. economy. When companies come in and they dump their products in the United States, they should pay automatically, let's say, a 10% tax. I do like the 10% for everybody. Like, of course, it's weird. The American people are who are paying the tax. But currently, Washington levies an average tariff on imports of roughly 3%, although the rate is greater for some countries like China, whose products face an average duty of 19%. Now, during his administration, Trump imposed tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports, triggering a trade war. He also put tariffs on a plethora of foreign goods such as steel, aluminum, washing machines, and solar panels. His successor, Joe Biden, has maintained the tariffs on China despite the damage done to the U.S. economy as a result of these policies. As the Post even notes, most of the trade barriers Trump imposed on China were ultimately extended by the Biden administration. They have been praised by the influential unions for promoting domestic industry. Biden has taken several economic measures that have fueled international trade tensions, including domestic subsidies for clean energy firms that have been sharply criticized by the European Union. Under Biden, the economic war with Beijing has been expanded. In addition to increasing sanctions and decoupling with parts of China, the White House seeks to significantly limit U.S. investments in the country as well as cripple the Chinese semiconductor industry. This comes amid Washington's pivot to Asia launched more than a decade ago by former President Barack Obama. The policy was bolstered by Trump and vastly escalated by Biden. The pivot is the largest military buildup since the Second World War, shifting 2/3 of all U.S. air and naval forces to the Asia-Pacific, encircling China for a future war. Trump's competitors for the 2024 GOP nomination also favor bellicose economic policies regarding Beijing. For instance, Vivek Ramaswamy has proposed a, quote, total decoupling with China, which would make a direct conflict much more likely. And regarding the island of Taiwan, along with fellow candidate Chris Christie, Ramaswamy has boasted of his willingness to send U.S. troops to fight a direct war with China. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, told the Post that Trump's plan would devastate the U.S. economy, especially consumers and workers. And moreover, it would cause the world's other large economic powers to conclude that the U.S. is simply an untrustworthy trading partner. So he says a 10% tariff would hurt the thousands of U.S. firms that depend on imports while also crippling the thousands of U.S. firms that depend on foreign export markets, regardless of Trump's intent to shore up domestic production, Posen said, adding, you'd be depriving American families of an enormous amount of choice, making their lives much more expensive and putting millions of people out of work. Even former Trump officials are raising the alarm. Economist Paul Winfrey, who served as Trump's deputy director of the Domestic Policy Council, warned that while the Federal Reserve is already struggling to limit inflation, quote, a tariff of that scope and size would impose a massive tax on the folks who it intends to help. But Gingrich defended the plan, arguing when the U.S. was the dominant economy, free trade was the rational strategy. Whether that's still a rational strategy is unclear. Of course, he forgets that the United States became, quote, the dominant economy through having liberalized economic policies and not our protectionism, increasing these tariffs and just, this is just going to damage everything that we do and further alienate us from the rest of the world. So, but that's what Trump's planning on doing. Even the worst policies of Trump when it comes to China that Biden has expanded, it sounds like Trump and the Republicans want to expand it on top of that, which seems to be always the way. So we'll have to see if there's any further pushback. I don't know how much the issue of tariffs came up in the debate last night, but I'll take a look and see if there was anything, and we'll catch up on it next week.
All right, Connor, thank you so much for that update. And like you mentioned, you'll be back next week for a show, and then we'll be back with more shows all week next week. So thank you so much, Connor.
Awesome. Thank you, Cal.